otherwise the first 10 minutes of this would be me just saying everything he's cut that has changed my life. So it's no exaggeration to say that there isn't a single edit I've made that hasn't been informed by this man sitting to my left. So thank you. So just hearing what would be a dream, just to have one of the credits that you did in New York on your resume. You could dine out for the rest of your life on that. But can you talk a little bit about how you found your community in post on the East Coast?
Sure. It all started. It started with an internship, really, at a company called Calliope Films. A lot of you probably know the name Chuck Workman, the guy who directed and edited all of those compilation films, the 100 Years of the Writers Guild, 100 Years of the DGA. And I was interning there. I knew nothing, by the way, about filmmaking. I had not gone to film school. And I met a woman named Sonia Polonsky, who was also working there. But when she wasn't working in commercials and trailers, which is what we did there, she was assistant edit and was the assistant on Annie Hall and the assistant on interiors, and she recommended me to Susan Morris. She'd also worked as a PA on Woodstock with Thomas Schoonmaker and Mark Scorsese, and that's how I got to be on Raging Bull. Once that was all going, a lot of my introduction to the editing community and sort of embracing and being embraced by the editing community was via graphic. We were making films in very few editing buildings. One was the Brill building. And at any given time, I mean, I guess when we were making this film, Scorsese and Thelma were editing in the building. Jonathan Demme and Craig McKay were editing in the building. I was telling you earlier that when we were working on Blood Simple, we had one room on the 7th floor of the Brill building, and Francis Coppola was making the Cotton Club, and he had every other room. And so I got to know his editor, Barry Malkin, his assistant, Dorian Harris, Marianne Brandon, whose name you probably all know, was an assistant music editor on the film. The late great Norm Holland was the music editor on the film. And we would all go out to eat together, and we just got to know one another. We would go into each other's rooms and say, have a look at this, what do you think? And there was a great moment every Friday where Coppola would go around and go into everyone's room and thank them for a week of hard work on the film. And every Friday he would come into our room where we were working on Blood Simple, and we never told him we weren't.
Very wise, very wise. So I think that one response right there really reveals the boys' sense of humor. Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up meeting the Coens?
Yeah, it was really luck. It was purely by chance. It was a summer day, and I think I probably wanted to go job hunting, and so I went to Midtown Manhattan, where there was the Brill building and a company called Trans Audio, and another building, the Screen Services building, and I ran into Skip Reedsay. And we knew one another because, again, this community was very, very small. And I asked him what he was doing. He said, well, I meet these two guys from Minneapolis. They finance the film independently with small investments from dentists and lawyers and doctors in Minneapolis. You want to come? And I said, sure, because I was sure they were working in an air-conditioned office.
Very sensible. Very sensible.
And I met them, and film, and Skip needed another sound editor, and so that's what we did.
That's great, and actually, this is a really interesting thing for, most of the editors in the audience know this, but you kind of think of the sound editor and the picture editor as cousins from the same family, and so it's very often, I've worked both as a sound editor and as a picture editor, and you know, the idea is you kind of think of it as a giant brick wall between the two, but it sounds like it was a bit more malleable.
It was, and I think, you know, one of the things that is still true is that picture assistants do a lot of sound work. We, you know, you're always doing temporary sound effects and a mix, and we're also there at the mix, and so we do learn sound. And you know, I told a story earlier about Susan Morse. When she was finishing Annie Hall, which was her first job in the cutting room, she went to the sound editor of that film, Dan Sable, and said, "Man, how do I get my next job?" And he said, "Knock on my door." And I love that story. I also wound up working with Dan at some point.
That's great. So here you are working in the sound department on Blood Symbol. You're on the mixing stage, I assume, with both of the brothers. What became the impetus to go to them and say, maybe think of me for another project?
So I kind of revealed to them that I wasn't really a sound editor, that I had been a picture assistant on a bunch of big films, and I had started to amass some small television credits. And after I had worked on an Oscar-nominated short as the editor, and I said, "So I'm really an editor." And by the way, well, I don't think it was a by the way. I was kind of vocal as a sound editor about the fact that I thought they should trim about 10 minutes from when they were trying to sell film in Hollywood, they were having a tough time. It was a great calling card, and distributors would say to them, "Really, this film shows a lot of talent, and we're about to make Weekend at Bernie's 3 or whatever it was," but they weren't distributing the film, and they were all saying, "It needs to be a little tighter." And so they came back to New York, and my audition, I guess, for Raising Arizona, which was 3 years away at that point, my audition for whatever their next film was helping them trim the 10 minutes.
That's great. And you know, you tend to, when you see a filmmaker's body of work, you kind of tend to think of it as you go from show to show to show to show. But there was a 3-year gap between Blood Symbol and Raising Arizona. So how did you stay connected with them?
You know, it was a funny time, and I feel like had they been bigger filmmakers, this might not have happened, but we actually became good friends and would hang out together, go to dinner together, see movies together. One part of the making of Raising Arizona that fascinates me to this day was we would work half a day on Fridays, and then we would go to see whatever just opened at the movies. And my first hint at what Raising Arizona was going to be was, it happened one night when we were supposed to have dinner, and I was editing a small dance piece for Twilight's Ark, and they came by the cutting room and began to speak to one another in a way that made me think they were having nervous breakdowns. And what they were saying was, I think it was Joel who said, laying on the floor, looking up. And when we didn't have crawdads, we ate sand.
You ate sand?
Exactly. And I realized eventually they were writing the script for Raising Arizona. And yeah, it was just kind of this natural thing. understudy Elizabeth McGovern in a play on Broadway, and that's how we spent Christmas. So it was a kind of a friendship.
Oh, that's so great. And I would like to take the next hour and a half to just deep dive into Raising Arizona, but I want to make sure we have enough time for this wonderful film. So clearly, words were just falling out of them, laying on the floor. So kind of talk about well, first of all, we're gonna get someone to open that bottle of water for you. A box of water?
Two-handed.
But the idea that they were constantly creating, and because you have Blood Simple, you have Raising Arizona, and you have Miller's Crossing, and I would think that you would have some kind of existential whiplash from the differences between those three films. Was working on Raising Arizona any different from working on Miller's Crossing?
Not really, nor was it that different from working on Blood Simple, in that they are two of the funniest people you can ever imagine being around. And so we were always laughing on Blood Simple, which was not a comedy. But yeah, and then Raising Arizona, you just go to work and you laugh every day, and whatever you're laughing hardest at goes into the movie. And there are a lot of laughs in this film. The other thing that was interesting is how extremely well read they are and well versed in cinema, and how much they were developing their own style. And all of these things together made each film less surprising than it might seem to be. So on Blood Simple, we talked a lot about Dashiell Hammett, the fiction writer. Blood Simple was a phrase that he used in a story called Red Harvest. And so we come back around much later to Miller's Crossing, and it stole liberally from a Dashiell Hammett novel called The Last Key. And then I mentioned stylistic evolution. I guess there's a shot in here. It's in the scene that Sam Raimi is in, actually. Did you all see Sam Raimi?
Oh yeah, this crowd clocked Sam.
Something falls into a body falls into frame, and it's really identical to the shot of the biker's
Randall takes Kyle, I believe.
Yes, in Raising Arizona. So those things would happen from film to film.
That's so great. And how would they write while you were working on Raising Arizona, or kind of what was that like?
So it at that time, and probably still, it was a little bit of an unpredictable and inconsistent process. The great thing was that I would edit, and they would be off somewhere, but in the same suite, and whenever I needed them to look at something, they were there. But their writing, they would sometimes hit a brick wall. Like, I think they began Miller's Crossing and got writer's block somewhere in there, and wrote Barton Fink. In fact, they knew that, and then they went back to Barton Fink, and the Barton Arms that you see in this was a reshoot when they knew that Barton Fink was going to be their next film. But my favorite story about their writing process is that they lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan when they wrote Blood Simple, and they used to write in Tom's Diner. Anyone know Tom's Diner? The Seinfeld Diner on 110th and Broadway. And they loved writing in a diner. It was just all those things that distract you at home don't, oddly enough, distract you in a diner. You just drink multiple cups of coffee and can't get your script written, and that's where they were used to writing, but as they became known, people would come up to their booth and interrupt them. And so they couldn't write in toms anymore. They loved doing it. And so Francis McDormand went to a diner supply warehouse and bought them a diner booth. And they wrote in the apartment.
So it's an interesting thing to work with directors who fancy themselves editors, but the Coen brothers are really great editors. And for the three of you in the audience that don't know this, can you talk a little bit about who the mystery editor was that cut Blood Simple?
So, yes, they had a pseudonym for themselves as editors, and they still use it. It's Roderick James. But they really did have a background in editing. Joel had worked at an editing house that did commercials and trailers and so forth. And when Sam Raimi made Evil Dead, he didn't really know how to find an editor. And so there was something at that time on both coasts called the Yellow Book. And it was a list of production and post-production services. And this woman, Edna, who Joel worked for, was listed in there, and Sam called and she said, I don't really want to do it, but I have this guy working for me who loves this genre, and that's how Joel and Sam met, and Joel came to edit Evil Dead. So it was the real deal.
And what was it like? You as the editor, did they have a hard time relinquishing control of the cut to you? Or was it like having a fellow editor? What was that like?
Strangely, it just felt like working with any director. I was very privileged to work as an assistant and on my earliest films, excuse me, with directors who really knew their way around the editing room. And so we would select performances together, we would select takes together, and the contingencies of editing any scene, things change a lot, and you realize, I could actually improve this best take by stealing 2 words from another take. And how am I going to combine these takes? I was looking at the scene with Turturro in this movie thinking, so many takes they got slammed together. But, it was a cake selection we would do together, and then they would have notes on the scene. So we'd screen my first cut, and then they'd go off. I'd do those notes, and we'd look at it again, do tiny tweaks, and move on. And that was the method all the way through. And it really worked, and it was really fun. One of the things that happens when you work with a director multiple times is you learn what they like. And one of the things that the Coen brothers liked, I learned, was excess. And so if you think about the scene in Raising Arizona where John Goodman and Will Forsythe discovered that they left the baby behind, and they begin to scream. I think I triple cut it on the first cut, and no, it was really good, but more, I want more. And I, nerd that all of us editors are, actually counted the number of times Turturro says, look into your heart. 9 times. A lot of directors wouldn't think 9 times would be good. So, yeah.
Oh, that's excellent. So, Albert Finney wasn't the original actor in the role. Can you talk a little bit about what happened and how that impacted you guys putting the film together?
Yeah. About 2 weeks before production was supposed to begin, the actor they wanted, who was Trey Wilson, who played Nathan Arizona in Raising Arizona, passed away suddenly. And as Joel and Ethan evolved as filmmakers, more and more of Hollywood read their scripts. No one had read Blood Simple, and then as needed, actors' agents got raised in Arizona. But a lot of people in Hollywood had read Miller's Crossing, and they heard immediately that Albert Finney wanted this role. And Albert Finney was a young legend, or youngish legend at the time. I mean, it was Tom Jones, for goodness sake. And they thought, wow, okay. And I think they still sort of, in the most respectful and polite way, read him anyway. But I've said this many times, I can't imagine anyone but Albert in that role. It was amazing. He also has an interesting cameo in the film. Do any of you know this?
Yeah.
He's the ladies' room attendant in the scene where Gabriel Byrne storms into the ladies' room.
You will never not see that for the rest of all of your lives. Well, we have just about 3.5 minutes left. I would love to know, obviously Miller Crossing is why we're all here. Is there anything else from your huge portfolio of films that you would like to touch on?
I don't know. That question reminds me of someone who I learned so much from when I was starting out. When I was interning at this place called Films, Paul Hirsch and Brian De Palma were renting space to edit Phantom of Paradise, and I just constantly picked Paul Hirsch's brain about everything. We stayed in touch and had a long-lasting friendship. And when he got his Oscar nomination for Star Wars, he wrote a speech in case he won. He wanted to be prepared. And he wrote a joke speech. And in the joke speech, he said, "Thank you for this, but they've all been great." And he even named a commercial that he had. And I think every editor feels this way. You know, they're all our children in some ways, and we love them dearly for their own unique qualities.
Yeah, the interesting thing about being an editor is that you have to have the skill set to be a director yourself, but you also have to not have the desire to be a director.
I mean, another thing I've talked about with some of you in this room is very often when you're working on a film, you make yourself fall in love with not just the characters, but the actors. And once you've done that, once you've sort of played that trick where you're playing the role of someone who is in love with each and every one of them, you're protecting them and you want to bring out their best. And that's a great motivation, and I think that does happen on every film.
That's great. Well, everyone, thank you so much for coming.